On the 25th of September 1953, Special Agent John Brady Murphy of the Baltimore Police was shot to passing while pursuing John Elgin Johnson, a long-time criminal. The FBI had tracked Johnson to a Baltimore theater where he opened fire, slaying Agent Murphy and wounding another agent. The agents returned fire, eliminating Johnson. The circumstances of Johnson's childhood experiences are not fully known. He was born in Lynn Grove, Iowa, to a large family on the 21st of August 1919 and was reared in the northwestern United States. After completion of the 10th grade at Cody, Wyoming, however, he made his initial thrust into a claim of recognition. He was arrested and convicted for larceny at Rapid City, South Dakota on the 23rd of November 1935. At the age of 16, the first step towards his height of violence had begun. But society, realising that youth has but youthful philosophy, granted him probation. Just 3 months later, young Johnson was again arrested, this time at Santa Fe, New Mexico, for breaking and entering, where he was sentenced on the 23rd of February. Just 3 months later, young Johnson was again arrested, this time at Santa Fe, New Mexico, where for breaking and entering he was sentenced on the 2nd of February 1936 to serve 18 months to 2 years. After 11 months of confinement, he was released. Under the alias of Eric Vernon Jefferson, his fast-rising career was again served when he was arrested for investigation of car prowling at Salt Lake City, Utah on the 2nd of March 1937. Thus, in 15 months, he was rapidly familiarising himself with the judicial and penal systems. On the 18th of August 1938, he was apprehended by local Los Angeles authorities on charges of burglary, which resulted in his removal to Rawlins, Wyoming, where the crime had occurred. With almost monotonous repetition, Johnson, now 19, was sentenced to serve from 2 to 3 years. 23 months later, in August 1940, Johnson returned to society. Just 1 month later, on the 17th of September 1940, a Los Angeles, California bank was robbed by a lone bandit armed with a blue steel revolver. On this day, the Hollywood branch of the Citizens National Trust and Savings Bank was conducting its normal daily business. Shortly after noon, a young man entered the bank and approached the first teller's cage. He was directed by the manager to the second teller. At the second teller's window, the young man handed over a number of small bills stating that it was $80, for which he wanted 4 $20 bills. As he was handling the larger bills, he pulled out a gun and said, "Give me the rest." The teller handed over the $610 to the young gunman, who ran from the bank. The FBI agents in the Los Angeles Police Department began an immediate investigation of the robbery. Extensive neighbourhood investigations were undertaken. It was on the same day, however, that 3 other bank robberies took place in Los Angeles. A minor crime wave had befallen the city. In usual investigative fashion, several immediate suspects were developed from among known criminals in the Los Angeles area. John Elgin Johnson was not among them. On the 28th of October 1940, information was received by the LA FBI office from the Iowa FBI office, which revealed that a John Elgin Johnson had been apprehended by the Iowa Police Department after robbing a department store in that city. The method of operation used in the Iowa robbery and the similarity of that bandit's description to the LA bank bandit were immediately noted by FBI agents handling the case. It was quickly determined that on the 17th of September 1940, Johnson had purchased the 1939 Mercury sedan. With it, he purchased a new car radio and 2 new tyres. He paid approximately $300 in cash. Johnson's picture was obtained and displayed to officials of the 4 banks which had been robbed. He was tentatively identified at 2 banks as being the lone bandit who committed the robberies. Again, Johnson, who had been free from law enforcement for less than 3 months, was about to re-enter prison life. Faced with the evidence against him, Johnson admitted to FBI agents at Iowa that he had perpetrated the LA bank robberies, but, ironically enough, he confessed to all committed on the 17th of September 1940. Later investigation eliminated Johnson from 2 of the robberies. Federal justice moved rapidly to Johnson. He was returned to LA, where on the 27th of November 1940 he was indicted by a federal grand jury on 2 counts of bank robbery. Entering a plea of guilty in the U.S. District Court in LA, he was sentenced on the 23rd of December 1940 to 2 15-year sentences to be served concurrently. The U.S. Penitentiary McNeil Island, Washington, received Johnson shortly thereafter, his third prison term at 21 years of age. Shortly after his arrival at Leavenworth, Johnson, together with 2 other inmates, attempted to escape and in doing so assaulted prison guards. This act resulted in Johnson being found guilty by a Kansas jury on the 18th of April 1944 of assault with intent to kill a federal officer. He was given a sentence of 4 years and recommended for transfer to the U.S. Penitentiary at Alcatraz, San Francisco, California. After 9 years of almost uninterrupted criminal activity, on the 10th of June 1944, Johnson arrived at Alcatraz. He was placed with America's toughest criminals, the select group who defy rehabilitation the utmost. Johnson became known as a regular attendant at the church services. He became a devoted visitor to his spiritual advisor and continually sought baptism into religion. The advisor, sympathetic but vigilant against emotional desire for conversion, did not grant Johnson's request. Johnson began taking instructions for his faith in correspondence course from a Middle Western university. The chaplain in later years related to FBI agents that Johnson's ready grasp of the faith's spiritual qualities was amazing. Johnson became so imbued with the principles, or so it appeared, that he expressed a strong desire to enter religious life as a lay brother. A lay brother is a person who has taken the vows of a religious order but is not ordained or obliged to take part in the full cycle of liturgy and is employed in ancillary or manual work. This ambition, as it turned out, never reached full bloom. It's difficult to imagine what Johnson actually learned at Alcatraz, but, in his own words, he learned to hate. In 9 years, Johnson must have heard thousands of innocent pleas from framed prisoners. His own mind might have been seething with vitriolic condemnation of the forces that kept him in vigilant tow. Perhaps it was here that he heard of FBI agents' cruelty, for that he later stated, "The FBI stinks, they hold guys out of windows and even sometimes let them drop." Johnson's tutelage was complete. He now hated society, hated law enforcement, and maybe even hated himself. It was on the 20th of March 1953 that he had been granted a conditional release from Alcatraz. He had undoubtedly shaken hands with several prison officials, received a small cash allowance, and was offered to report to the LA Federal Probation Office. He was free, or was he? Could he forget almost 17 years of detention? He was 34 now. He had a form of trade since he had learned plumbing and machine stop work in prison. He headed towards LA, the city of his choosing, to begin again. Begin what? Only Johnson knew. Johnson's arrival at LA was notably different from the other ex-convicts living in the area. He registered at the LA Police Department as an ex-convict on the 21st of March 1953, as California law demands. He contacted the Federal Probation Office and apparently set out on the road to rehabilitation. He located his former prison chaplain, then assigned to LA. He also approached the assistant city editor of the LA Mirror, Sid Hughes, from whom Johnson requested aid in securing a driver's license. Johnson related to the newspaperman some tales of hardships at Alcatraz and other details concerning innocent men being held there. Hughes became interested in Johnson's rehabilitation and secured for him a California driver's permit, and Hughes allowed him to travel around in a Mirror-owned car whilst preparing for his test. Because of his interest in Johnson, benevolent Hughes aided him in securing a position with a heater company located in an LA suburb, Huntington Park. For approximately the next 3 months, Johnson's release seemed to vindicate the faith placed in him. He was not reported at any criminal activity. He registered with the Huntington Park Police Department on the 22nd of April 1953 as an ex-convict and apparently had joined the Little Herod Group. On the 19th of July 1953, information was received by the robbery detail of the LA Sheriff's Office that an individual had appeared at a LA County supermarket, introducing himself to the manager as Watkins LA Police Department Chain Store Robbery Detail. This police officer made inquiries concerning the location of store funds, the amount, and when it was taken to the bank. He also confided to the manager a tip that the market was about to be robbed. The policeman's line of questioning finally aroused the suspicion of the manager, who had noted that the man had entered a red convertible. The grocer jotted down the California license number. Subsequent investigation by the LA Sheriff's Office determined that the red convertible was owned by a resident of Huntington Park, California. The owner had recently purchased the Ford but had not yet secured a driver's license. Meanwhile, it had been loaned to a few recently befriended men, among them was John Elgin Johnson. Sheriff's deputies located Johnson's police record and displayed his photograph to the supermarket owner. Johnson was identified as Watkins of the LA Police Department. On the 4th of August 1953 at approximately 5:40 p.m, Lieutenant Kenan Kendrick of the Huntington Park Police Department was called to a local residence to investigate the discovery of a body. At this address, lying garroted to the bottom of a stall shower, was discovered the body of the owner of the red convertible. He had been strangled with a necktie tied neatly in a square knot. John Elgin Johnson, his former companion, was not to be found for questioning. The victim's landlord related to the police that he had been painting screens on the building on the 1st of August 1953 when he overheard a conversation between the victim and a tall, reddish-blonde-haired fellow who stated, "I feel sorry for you, you've done a lot for me." Johnson's picture was soon identified by the landlord as being the described individual last seen with the victim. Further investigation disclosed that the deceased had been seen by a couple on the 2nd of August 1953 in the company of several men in his backyard. One of the men was merely described as being tall. At this point in the investigation, the Huntington Park Police Department believed that they had two prime suspects in the murder, one being John Elgin Johnson. The other was arrested 5 days later but furnished a substantial alibi for his whereabouts at the time of the murder. Johnson became the lone and prime suspect, but he was still not available for interview. His whereabouts were unknown. Eventually, information came to the attention of the Huntington Park Police Department that a letter addressed to one of Johnson's former residences bore the return address of Arthur Dawson, fictitious, Box 920, Reg 66032, Hall B, Jefferson City, Missouri, postmarked on the 30th of July 1953. Swift checking revealed that the name Dawson was one of the two men who had been involved with Johnson in the attempted break from Leavenworth Prison 9 years previously. Dawson was incarcerated in the Missouri State Penitentiary, Jefferson City, Missouri, and Johnson was apparently retaining his membership in a Crimes Lost Legion. On the 31st of August 1953, information received from the Jefferson City Penitentiary indicated that Dawson had received a letter postmarked at Cincinnati, Ohio, bearing the return address of Frank Guilford and a residence in Florida. The body of the message stated, "Received letter from our mutual friend, John." It also contained a $50 money order for Dawson. The FBI entered the search for John Elgin Johnson when a request was received from the U.S. Board of Parole, Washington, D.C., stating that on the 10th of August 1953, John Elgin Johnson, with a license, had a conditional release, violator's warrant issued against him charging him with loss of contact, associating with persons having criminal backgrounds, impersonating a police officer, auto theft, and alleged murder. 4 months after the last look at the grey gloom of Alcatraz, Johnson chose a return passport. Coupling their investigation, the Huntington Park Police Department made available to FBI agents at LA the most recent accounting of Johnson's activities. Local investigation proved momentarily fruitless as to his location. Acting upon the information concerning the receipt of a letter by Johnson's convict friend Dawson, a request was promptly relayed to the Miami FBI office to determine the identity of Frank Guilford at a Florida address. This investigation failed to show that a Frank Guilford ever resided at the given address, but it was revealed that the residence was occupied by a Johnson family, soon discovered to be the parents of John Elgin Johnson. On the 22nd of September 1953, Johnson's father was interviewed by FBI agents. He stated that Johnson, for the first time in many years, had visited his parents just 4 days prior and had left their home on the 21st of September 1953, saying that he was heading north and then back to LA. The alertness of a West Coast police officer and the rapid teamwork of the FBI had reached across the United States and placed themselves just one day behind Johnson. Johnson had related to his parents that he was on parole and was undoubtedly violating it, but he felt that he might be railroaded back to California since they found an associate of mine murdered. He commented too on his bitter experiences at Alcatraz and how he was attempting to go straight, just waiting for the chance to clear his name. Exhaustive interviews with the cooperative parents did not furnish any logical lead as to Johnson's whereabouts. The search continued, but without success. Meanwhile, reports were being received by the LA FBI office, which placed Johnson in the Midwest during mid-August in 1953. FBI agents from the Milwaukee office had determined that one John Everant had resided in a Chicago hotel on or about the 15th of August 1953. It was related that Everant had bragged to a stranger about his release from Alcatraz several months previous. Everant, finally identified as John Elgin Johnson, was living true to form. So true and accurate that he displayed to the stranger a P-38 pistol. Johnson told this individual of his early experiences in crime and during his bragging conversation said, "They will never take me back to prison." The prophecy of a warped mind was not to go unnoticed. According to this information, an eventful shadow was being cast, for when Johnson heard the elevator stop at his room floor, he would grasp his gun and on 2 occasions walked into the hallway, gun in hand, to determine who had gotten off at the elevator. Johnson, who told his parents several weeks later he wanted to clear his name, was more than ready to greet any opposition in the fashion he knew best. On the 25th of September 1953, Sidney Hughes, veteran LA Mirror reporter, received a telephone call from Baltimore, Maryland. The caller was Johnson. The newspaperman had earlier tried to help Johnson by assisting him in obtaining a job after Johnson's release from Alcatraz. Hughes, who received the call at about 4:30 p.m. LA time, notified the police there as soon as the call was completed. Hughes said that Johnson had told him of being in Baltimore with $10,000 which he had received from a friend to set Johnson up in business. Johnson wanted to know if he was wanted or sought in Los Angeles, California, as he desired to return there and enter a business. Hughes, thinking quickly, told Johnson that he would have to check to determine the information. He requested Johnson to call him back at exactly 3:35 p.m. Johnson agreed. The LA FBI office instantly relayed this information to the Baltimore FBI office. A manhunt was instituted to locate Johnson somewhere in Baltimore. The information at hand, a description, and a knowledge that he was using a telephone. A battle of time was declared. Back in Los Angeles, 3,000 miles away, FBI agents established an open line between their office and the newspaper room. Thus, a strange, quadrangular relationship began. Hughes, a known factor, Johnson, an unknown factor, and 2 teams of FBI agents closely allied with knowledge and training, but separately by a continent's width. At 3:55 p.m. Pacific Daylight Saving Time, 20 minutes later than scheduled, Sid Hughes received another call from Baltimore, a call which was not quite as expected. A pre-arranged plan with the mirror switchboard operator stalled momentarily the salutatory greeting. Finally, the conversation began. FBI Baltimore was alerted the call was in progress. Feverish activity began at Baltimore to pinpoint the fugitive. Hughes, careful to give no indication that he was stalling, began enticing Johnson into a lengthy conversation. They talked at the onset about Johnson's running away. Johnson would only state that he was waiting for the Huntington Park incident to clear up. They talked about the $10,000 which Johnson had received. He replied it was from a legitimate source. Johnson was pressed for his location. He would only state that he was near Baltimore. Johnson queried Hughes, reporting the conversation. He pushed the point, saying, "You'll have to report it." The criminal intuition was at work too. Johnson expressed surprise that the incident had not been cleared. Hughes, as instructed, tried to determine from Johnson who some of the murdered victims' friends were. Johnson was evasive, only describing some Johnny who lived nearby. The conversation progressed. It was 4:30 p.m. LA time. In Baltimore, squads of the FBI agents continued to comb the downtown area. Veteran reporter Hughes recounted with Johnson the experiences which Johnson had earlier told him of Alcatraz. Johnson related that he would not spend another hour back in prison as it taught him how to hate. He admitted to having a gun. Hughes pleaded with him to throw it away. Hughes requested him to turn himself into the FBI. Johnson replied, "They stink. They hold guys out of windows and even let them drop." It was 4:35 p.m. Pacific time. Still talking, still looking. The conversation at times was jocular, mostly serious. Hughes was subtly endeavouring to determine the fugitive's exact location. Johnson continued to remain evasive. "I'm in Washington, D.C. and have visited the Smithsonian Institute and other buildings," Johnson said, and "I'm going to let the whole thing ride out for a month or so, as I'm still afraid of the Huntington Park murder." At 4:44 p.m, Hughes still had not received from Johnson any hint as to his exact whereabouts, but back in Baltimore the battle of time was nearing a decision. 5 minutes earlier, the FBI had learned that Johnson was in the Townie Theatre, a motion picture house in the heart of downtown Baltimore. A crowd had turned out to see the Mickey Spillane mystery, eye the jury, but the mezzanine, where the public telephone was located, was almost deserted. Upon learning of Johnson's location, 4 agents nearby proceeded immediately to the theatre. On their arrival, they learned that the mezzanine, which was closed to the evening's patrons, was accessible by 2 means of stairways. The agents divided, 2 of them proceeding cautiously up each stairway. One of the FBI men was Special Agent J. Brady Murphy. As he and his companion reached the lobby of the mezzanine almost simultaneously with the other 2 agents, they observed that only one person was on the mezzanine, a man in the telephone booth. Inside the booth, Johnson, his criminal cunning ever alert, sensed his impending apprehension. 2 shots rang out of the booth. One bullet crashed into the abdomen of J. Brady Murphy. Another tore into the hip of Murphy's fellow agent. All 4 agents opened fire on the phone booth. Though mortally wounded, Agent Murphy emptied his revolver at the figure of the desperate man behind the glass and would petition. 15 times the agents fired, and 15 deadly slugs ripped through the booth. Johnson toppled over towards the floor, but his head, crashing through the broken glass of the door, held him partly up. Before he stopped moving forever, he tried vainly once or twice to lift his head. Back in LA, Sid Hughes had been talking to Johnson for almost 50 minutes when he heard, as he described it later, commotion and the sound of coins ringing in the telephone and pay slot. The line went dead. The Baltimore operator said, "I'm sorry, sir, your party's line seems to be out of order." At the Town Theatre, FBI agents had to remove the door of the phone booth in order to extricate Johnson's body. The receiver still dangled from the telephone, and a P-38 automatic slipped from Johnson's hand. He had been hit 7 times by the agent's gunfire in the stomach, head, chest and shoulder. He was pronounced dead on arrival at a nearby hospital. Meanwhile, J. Brady Murphy and the other wounded agent were also rushed to a hospital, where they later eventually recovered fully. But Murphy, just before going into the operating table, sensed that he was about to pass away. He inquired about Johnson and was told that the criminal was dead. The dying prayer which left the agent's lips was measure of vast difference between the 2 men. "May God have mercy on his soul," said J. Brady Murphy about John Elgin Johnson.